Welcome to the third hour of the Alex Jones Show here today on Infowars.com. I'm Mike Adams. I'll be filling in for this hour. I've got some breaking intel to share with you on the controlled demolition of the national food supply. I've also got a special guest coming up here in the next segment who has some additional intel to add to that picture. Now, to set the stage for you here, I need to underscore the urgency of the situation of the controlled demolition of the food supply. I received intel from a different source several weeks ago who told me, and this was a source related to the DC swamp and all of what's going on with the Biden regime and so on. And that source told me that their orders had gone out to food logistics companies, supply chain companies, distribution hubs, and so on to achieve slowdowns in food distribution. And in addition to that, we're watching millions of meat birds who are being culled across America, tens of millions of egg-laying hens and millions of turkeys and so on. And this is all being done via PCR diagnosis of bird flu. And we know that PCR is a fraud. And so we know that the mass culling of these meat birds is part of the controlled demolition to take down the food supply in America and deprive the American people of access to affordable meat, in this case, chicken and turkeys and other such birds. Now, what you're about to learn here today with my special guest is how the rail logistics systems are now, well, canceling, or shall we say force majeure, on selective contracts that deliver grains to dairy herds and other meat animal herds across America. And this is designed to force farmers and ranchers and dairy operators to cull their own dairy cows and meat cows and hogs and so on. And what you have to understand about this is it doesn't take very long to starve, to starve to death dairy herds. It only takes a matter of days before they face starvation and just a few weeks before they die. And yet to restore dairy herds, it takes about 8 years to get back to production because, it takes years to raise cows. You have to have cow-calf operations, and then those cows have to mature, and then you can't restore all of it at once. It takes time. It takes, a few years, about 8 years, really, to get back into full operation. So if this effort to starve out the dairy herds in America is successful, and it is happening right now, then we are going to have a shortage of dairy products, milk and cheese and yogurt and everything else that comes from dairy until the year 2030. And this problem is being deliberately caused. And so, again, we've got a guest coming up who's going to give us more intel about that in the next segment, as well as other warnings about what's happening with the grand solar minimum and how it's affecting weather systems that are going to lead to more crop losses around the world. And right now, by the way, in Europe, there is an Arctic cold blast that is shocking the springtime planting that is happening there. It's going to lead to more food shortages in Europe on top of the shortages that would be caused by a lack of heating gas for the greenhouses across much of Western Europe, as well as the lack of exports from Ukraine, which is the breadbasket of Europe. These effects are going to be felt worldwide. And as of yesterday, there are now food riots in Peru. So it has reached South America. There's uprisings, riots, protests in some European countries, in many Middle Eastern countries, but now South America. And this is only the beginning. We're going to see food riots in the United States. My prediction is the second half of this year. We're going to see mass famine and food scarcity, especially affecting marginal or developing nations that can barely afford to feed their own people, even in normal circumstances. And let me point out something very important in all of this. The globalist extermination efforts to depopulate the planet, they realized that they needed two weapons in order to achieve global extermination. For developed nations, they use vaccines because they knew they could convince people in America and Australia and the UK and so on to take vaccines in very large percentages. But the vaccine uptake was extremely low in developed nations, especially in African nations, such as Nigeria, for example. The vaccine uptake, I think it was only in single digits. And so the weapon system for the globalists to take out developing nations is food scarcity and mass starvation. And that is what is being administered right now. Of course, they're also trying to take down the United States as much as possible. But because the U.S. is a wealthier nation, people can absorb more price increases, and it doesn't eat into their discretionary income as much in terms of percentages as what it does in a developed nation where people are living on poverty level, a couple dollars a day, and if food prices go up 20%, they begin to starve. In America, food prices have already gone up 20%. We are not yet facing mass starvation, and food prices can still go up further, and they will go up further. One of the guests I interviewed just the other day, Marjorie Wildcraft, is predicting 100% food price increases this year. That is, from January of 2022 to the end of this year, food prices will double. So they went up 20% last year. She believes they will go up 100% this year, and that they will double again in 2023. So we are not far from the point of mass uprisings and food riots, and yet we are living under what I can only call a food terrorism regime, which is deliberately trying to destroy the logistics, the food delivery systems. You've got the USDA paying farmers to not grow food and even to destroy their crops. You've got shutdowns of pipelines. In fact, it was the very first thing that Joe Biden did when he got into his fake presidential position, the acting president. He signed executive orders to shut down pipelines and to shut down thousands of permits that could have brought us affordable energy, that could have been used to create fertilizer, that could have been used to fertilize farms and grow food right here in America. If Joe Biden has done anything at all, it is to make sure that America is not self-reliant, to cripple America's infrastructure when it comes to food and energy, while waging a culture war against the American people that now has the entire federal government claiming that they don't know what a woman is. Claiming, even the Supreme Court Justice nominee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, claims she doesn't know what a woman is. And yet she's proclaimed as allegedly going to be the first black woman to sit on the bench. But she doesn't know what a woman is. So we are in very dangerous territory. We are watching the final stages of collapse of a debt-based empire. We're watching the weaponization of food scarcity against the people and the weaponization of the currency with with Biden saying that he now has to have about a $6 trillion budget, a federal spending budget next year. That's about $500 billion per month. And then they're going to have stimulus money printing on top of that, trillions more. We are very rapidly approaching the point where our government, our illegitimate government, is going to be spending $1 trillion a month. We're at $30 trillion in debt right now. $1 trillion a month is coming. And this is the final blowout stage. And then you're going to see the collapse of everything. You're going to see the collapse of the dollar, the collapse of the federal government as we know it, the collapse of America as it is currently structured, the collapse of the food supply, the collapse of Democrat cities, the collapse of the rule of law, the collapse of reason and logic, by the way, and even the collapse of definitions of men and women, and that collapse is taking place right now. So we are in red alert territory right now, and we only have a few months remaining until the food starts to go empty, at least regionally, on many grocery store shelves across America. Not that it's all going to be wiped out, but you're going to see food missing from the shelves in many places across the country. So your time to prepare is growing very short. To prepare for the collapse of food, the collapse of the dollar, the collapse of the rule of law, all of these things, your time is very, very short. We're going to give you some solutions today, and we'll be back after this break with a special guest with more intel in these areas and much more. I'm Mike Adams, guest hosting this third hour. Stay with us. We'll be right back here on The Alex Jones Show. All right, welcome back, folks, to The Alex Jones Show. I'm Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, filling in for the rest of this hour. We've got a special guest coming up with new intel on the collapse of the food situation in America, the deliberate collapse. But first, I want to mention how much I love the idea that InfoWars came up with these collectible silver coins. I think it's a fantastic idea. First of all, silver has value all by itself. And by the way, you can get these at patriotcollectibles.com. The current coin, which I believe is the second in the series, is the Tree of Liberty founding member silver rounds. These are 1 ounce, custom made, custom designed silver coins. Not only are they, of course, silver, but they're also collectibles. They also help fund the InfoWars operation. So get those at patriotcollectibles.com. And guys, please save a set for me because I want to buy a set myself. Just give me I really want a set of this, and I haven't done it, but just let me get in and buy one before they're all gone. They're probably going to be gone like tomorrow, so I better hurry. Anyway, enough said about that. I'm a big fan of silver, big fan of that whole project. All right, now we're going to bring in our guest today, who is David Dubine, and his channels are called Adapt 2030 on various social media and video platforms. And David Dubine is an expert in the grand solar minimum phenomenon, which affects agriculture and crop production. And David brought me some intel yesterday that just coincided with intel that I'd received a couple weeks earlier, but I had not yet gone public with because I wasn't able to confirm it. Well, David's intel confirms this, and now he joins us here to share that intel and break it down for us. Welcome to the show, David. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. And I totally agree. If Russia's going off to a gold-backed ruble and a gold-backed commodity payment system, we're going to be swinging back into using precious metals. And I'm sure down the road after this food collapse and during it, you're going to be able to use those rounds of silver to trade off for medicines, food, ammo. Just like it's been through history, those metals are always used and tradable, always has been for the last 6,000 years. So I don't see why it would change in this cycle.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, David. I'm glad you jumped right to that point, because when food scarcity becomes widespread, you end up seeing a lot of real desperate local barter and trade. And the things that people trade for food historically around the world in collapse scenarios are ammunition, silver especially, and then other forms of emergency medicine, not so much fiat currency, because usually these are in situations where the currency is collapsing. But how desperate do you think the situation is going to get here over the next 1 to 2 years in America, David?
Oh, I would fast forward that to less than 6 months. Coming into the harvest season of this year, 2022, we're definitely going to see something that nobody has really envisioned in terms of how society can collapse so quickly and how scarce food can become even in a food producing nation, and how fast the value and the agreed value of a currency, a fiat currency that's traded for goods and services across the planet, how that faith can be so, like in an instant, eroded away, where that will have no value. And if you have a valueless piece of paper, you're not going to bring anything into your country. I mean, yeah, you could use it within the country during that initial collapse phase, but at that point, then what do you really get from that paper? Nothing. And we've always had this illusion that it's going to last forever. I mean, even empires, I think the average length of an empire span is 265 years, somewhere around there. Fiat currencies are, they just don't last. Whatever form they have taken up to this point, 100% of them have collapsed, except the ones that are in use now. They've all collapsed up to this point, and we're talking thousands of years. So if you're looking at historical cycles, and that's what I like to study, is cycles, the things that trigger societal collapse, government overthrows, economic shifts, and then population migration. There's a cycle to that as well, and I think we're right at the cusp of another one. But it's all about the agreed value, and then what is it going to be value when, what is a 50-pound bag of a hard red winter wheat that could be used as seed or ground into grain? What's the true value of that if you're in a starvation scenario? But it is going to be lightning fast.
I'm glad you mentioned that. What is real value? Because right now our economy has been based on a lot of financialization of the economic output, which is bankers creating financial instruments, derivatives, and making bets on things that are real, but then assigning value to the bets themselves, which is how we got the subprime mortgage collapse situation. But we are seeing right now, especially with Russia and the decisions made by Putin, a shift from global financialization of the economy to global commodities-backed currencies. And in the case of Putin, even gold-backed, now 5,000 rubles to a gram of gold, which establishes really a floor for the price of the ruble, which also establishes a floor for the exchange rate of the ruble to the dollar via gold. But Russia is now saying that they're going to demand rubles for commodities exports especially from unfriendly countries. So it's not just energy now, it's going to be aluminum, it's going to be wheat, it's going to be other minerals and metals, copper, things that they export, and fertilizer as well. So suddenly commodities matter. What's real has real value. Your thoughts, David?
Well, if we go back to the denarius and the 250 grains of wheat measured down to the exact grain for that weight of silver, I mean, are we going to go back to silver traded for food? Because food, in my opinion, will become the most valuable commodity on the planet, hands down. Everything else will be second, third, and fourth. Food is the thing that keeps a society and a civilization functional. If you don't have the nutrients, the calories to keep your bodies and industry moving and people functioning, to keep the base level of just keeping the lights on, if you don't have food to supply that, you've seen through history, they'll let nations go down into vegetarianism to send protein to the troops so the frontline guys keep the morale up. And look at World War II when we went to Victory Gardens and how they rerouted all the highest value foods to the frontline troops. It's all about the food. And you need bodies functional, and you need that protein, and you need the micronutrients, and you need the minerals and the vitamins. And if you don't have that, your cognitive function declines, and so does the ability to make good decisions and just physically getting work done. You can't have a society where everybody's laying on the floor malnourished. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, you make a really good point there that when people lack calories and they're facing famine, their cognitive function begins to decline, and you might end up in a country where people don't even know the difference between a man and a woman, for example. That could happen. Or you might end up with a president who doesn't know where he is, or a fake president who's demented and mentally incapacitated. But in any case, I know you've got a lot more intel to share with us. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break here, David. Stay with us. I want to ask you then about more specifics about what's happening with rail-based deliveries of grain across America, and why this is not yet public information, but it will be soon. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be right back here on the Alex Jones Show. All right, get prepared. Take some notes for this section here, this segment of the show today. Welcome back. I'm Mike Adams, of the Health Ranger here for Alex Jones Show today on Infowars.com. And we're joined by David Dubine, who is the creator of the channel called Adapt 2030. And he's an expert in the grand solar minimum and the effects of solar radiation on food production and weather systems as well. So welcome back, David. I'd like you to get into now, you and I both have many different intel sources, and you really shocked me with some of the intel that you shared with me yesterday. I know there are details that you can't yet make public, but share with us what you can, and then I'll augment that with some of my sources. But go ahead and jump right into that.
Yeah, I will. And the way we're going to take a look at this is it's going to be broken into two different parts of the world as we know. We got the industrial side over here, and then we have sort of Main Street, just people going off into the supermarkets that are going to soon experience what the industrial side is seeing. Well, when you're going to move grain, it doesn't generally move by truck. It's too bulky, it's too heavy. The ROI on that by moving 18-wheelers, it just doesn't work unless it's in a very, very close location to where it's coming off the field. If you're going to take it from the granary to a factory that might be a mile or two away, and they might even have set up some sort of conveyor system at that point to cut down on that over the years of how many transports are going to take. So you're going to generally run your grain by rail. And if you're a major buyer and you know how many cattle you have and what your throughput is per year, you're going to contract forward that out on, I need this many rail cars for this year, and I will guarantee payment that we will take 100,000 cars, 220,000 cars, and you give it to us at a certain price, and you always know that we are going to run grain on this. So you're going to have the correct cars, and your teams are going to get ready, and then you'll have your crews, and everything should be a well-oiled machine. If you're buying in at 200,000+ rail cars on delivery, that should be a devoted staff and team just for your movement of goods. But it seems that even though there has been payment on contract, Walmart and consumer goods have suddenly bumped grain off the rails because they're paying about 30% more for their delivery. And even though it's on a contract basis, they're calling force majeure. Now, force majeure, at least for me, just the way I understand, that's an act of God. Your ship capsized at sea because of a rogue wave. There was massive fires that blew through and rolled up, 600,000 square acres somewhere that ruined your facilities and it ruined tracks and you couldn't, transit at that point. Anything an act of God on that kind of earthquake, a landslide that's taken something out. But to get a higher freight rate from consumer goods manufacturers and sellers in large box stores to then knock the grain off the rails to put theirs in the front of it, it just doesn't make sense to me unless it's to slow down the delivery of grains to the end user, whether it's feeder cattle or dairy, and chicken and turkey. These are all, included in this hog. But now they want to vaccinate the chickens, and it just gets into this whole bizarre world of they want to vaccinate chickens now, and you see where that might take it. But
so
if you
let
slow
me jump
down
in here,
the grain,
David. I'm sorry to interrupt, but what you're saying is that the rail carriers are now dropping the contracts that they previously agreed to deliver hundreds of thousands of cars of grain to certain kinds of operations such as cattle and dairy and so on. And they are claiming force majeure, which means they don't have to make good on their contracts. That's what you're saying, and that is beginning now, correct? Are you able to confirm that?
Yes. And it's also the rule of law. If we look at, contract law, it means there is no more rule of law. So now this, where does it move from this point? The faith in a fiat currency being shattered at the moment with the US dollar, it's no different than if force majeure is being called because you want to get a higher freight rate from an industrial good to deliver off to Walmart or somewhere. It's the same thing. The rule of law no longer exists. So
we saw that with the CDC interfering with rental contracts right during COVID. So yeah, they just said we're going to overwrite the contracts. But critically, what you are saying is that dairy herds and cattle herds and so on, they will begin to starve to death within a few days from right now. And if they are not in some way able to be fed or rescued or whatever, then entire herds in America are going to be culled. I mean, they're going to be killed. It's like killing the goose that lays the golden egg. In this case, you're killing the cow that provides the milk, that provides the cheese and the yogurt and everything. And it's going to take years to ever bring that back. Many years.
And look on the consumer side too. If you go up the chain of value in dairy, it's the whey proteins, and then you finally get up to what would be put and included in the infant formulas. Now, a lot of people are thinking about this. If there's a complete destruct in the dairy industry, yeah, your cheeses might not come, and milk is the bottom of the barrel. That's the lowest, value product that comes out of a dairy facility. But, when you're bringing it far up to the point where infant formulas are going to get disrupted or even non-available, where does that bring part of our society if, you're being malnourished anyway, and you're counting on something to be able to feed children? I don't know, that takes us in this direction.
Well, folks, I want to encourage everybody, if you can, get yourself some goats. Seriously, get some Nubian goats. Yeah. That's a great breed. You can milk Nubians. They're much more productive than the Nigerian dwarf goats that I milked in years past. It's a lot of milking work to get a little bit of milk, by the way. It's not really worth it. But you get some bigger goats and you can, infants, human babies can live on goat's milk. It's actually the best replacement for them instead of the processed garbage that's sold in the stores, so-called infant formula. It's junk, in my opinion. It's toxic, in my opinion. But I also wanted to add this, David. We have intel because we're in the food business as well. We were told, I think roughly 2 months ago, that there's no more certified free-range organic milk powder in North America as of 2 months ago. And that's a product that we buy 50,000, 100,000 pounds at a time or whatever. Can't even get it. It's gone. And that was before this that you're talking about. So even we are seeing shortages. We are seeing just things completely wiped out, especially, organic options are just getting destroyed. And then conventional options are going to be destroyed as well. So, when are the mainstream Americans, in your opinion, David, going to go to the grocery store and start to see some shocking, significant percentage of the shelves empty? Or is it just going to be prices are 300% higher, but they still have supply, or a mixture of that? What's your opinion?
We can start over in England or in the UK. They're giving a list right now of things that were grown in greenhouses that are not going to be available for anybody to purchase. This is in England, things like eggplants, that sort of thing. Again, it comes down to, can you heat the greenhouse, and what's the production coming out of that? But I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they are work and go in are associated with Walmart in a certain capacity, and they were saying that the prices there, they're repricing 6,000 food items right now. So that'll give you an indication. Aldi is also increasing prices of food anywhere from 30 to 50%. I know that's in Germany, but it's also the same here in the United States. So, we come into that conundrum, like how on a different supply chain, completely separated from an ocean, some of it's locally sourced or at least continentally sourced. Like, how do you raise the prices across the board on both continents the exact same percentages, which doesn't make sense. But there is some drip feed of what is going to be lost or what is going to be less available in stores. And you might have to put a sheet together to start to take a look at all the strawberries won't be there, Abergaines won't be there, the oranges aren't coming here. And you just look at the nations that are having a problem in Europe that export out as well. You got the Spain over there problems, France is having problems. And it is going to be it's going to be like chipping a piece of ice away to make an ice sculpture. Well, you hit one piece, maybe there's a larger chunk that comes off. You hit it and there's a couple flecks that come off. It's going to be the same way with the food inavailability. You might go in one day and then, one shelf is completely empty, or you go in the next day, it's one thing that's been repriced or not available. And notice the switch that's coming over. And take a look at your cans and see if they've been double stamped for the good by date or the expiration date. Because there seems to be stories coming across of a lot of cans that have been double stamped, so you can't really read the expiration dates on it. Don't know if it's on purpose.
David, I got to jump in here. Sorry to interrupt you. We're going to go to break here shortly, but I'm going to go grab a lid of my own hydroponic grow system. I'm going to show it to you here on camera. I'm going to go grab that during the break, and I'll be back to show people that. And let's bring some solutions into this, David. What can people do right now to not starve to death and to be more food self-reliant as Joe Biden is trying to destroy the food supply for all Americans? We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, folks. Wow, I had to make a mad dash to my grow area to show you this. We're going to talk about solutions for food. Let me show you this. This is these are some plants of a hydroponic system. This is a non-circulating hydroponic grow box system, and it uses no electricity and no pumps whatsoever. So if you look at these plants, you see they're developing their own root systems, and this works in an off-grid mode. If the electricity goes down, your plants don't die, unlike in many aeroponic systems. And if you want to just research this, there are a ton of videos online. This is called the Kratky system, Kratky, and technically it's called the suspended net pot non-circulating hydroponic system. And I am growing unbelievable amounts of food using this system. You can make them yourself. It's not a sales pitch here. This is a pitch for not dying of starvation, basically. But this happens to be, I think, Paris Island lettuce. You can grow red oak leaf lettuce, you can grow chard, you can grow cilantro, oregano, you can grow your own herbal medicine. You can then distill those, you can make your own natural antibiotics using this system. No soil, no weeds, dirt cheap to operate. Let me set it down. It costs almost nothing to do this after your initial investment on the bins. So David, I want to ask you also, wow, I got water and roots here all over. I want to ask you, just with that introduction, how critical is it that we all have to get to solutions and we have to become more food independent? And what do you recommend people do to start that journey if they haven't started it already?
First, I would, set aside a budget, and, with your family or husband, wives, whatever it is, take a look at your finances and see how much first you can allocate to getting seeds and getting tools. And you're going to need row cover in case it gets cold, and you're going to have to think of things to defend your plants. And can you make natural insecticides from things that are, they're not going to get into your food system and make you sick. And it's a great point about all the lettuces that you spoke about there. What is the nutrition content or the vitamin or the mineral content in lettuce? I mean, a perfect example is romaine lettuce versus iceberg lettuce. If you look at romaine, it's literally 4x to 10x across everything from the vitamin A all the way from the iceberg lettuce. Multiple, extra. Let's see, that would be, I wouldn't consider it exactly a superfood like Moringa oleifera might be, or goji berries. You have to go more into Chinese medicine on the longevity herbs, but things that can keep you nutrient rich, because if you look at the plagues through history, The reason that a lot of these plagues onset were because people's immune systems were so depleted because they didn't have, micronutrients, vitamins, and these sort of things that we would need. So if you have the research, and we have the internet available right now, start to do the research on things that can grow in your area that are easy to grow. Like moringa is the miracle tree, incredibly easy to grow. But then, do an analysis on what you want to eat, because you're not going to want to grow something that you're not going to eat. But then it's really, doing a little bit of research on, what's going to keep your body sustained, what's easy to grow, and what you can protect easily. That is a good weekend of a few people doing the research, and at least you can get a base list of where you can go out and then get the seeds and start getting your garden together at that point. At the base minimum, doing something like that.
Well, absolutely, David. I'm really glad you mentioned those points about nutrition, because the lettuce and the processed food and all the dead food that you typically buy at the grocery store, it's not doing you much good anyway. You may think you're filling your belly, but you're not getting the nutrition that you need. And one of the silver linings from this global famine that has already begun is that more people are going to learn about how to grow real nutritious food. And you might think, if you're a meat eater, barbecue all the time, you might think, oh, I can't live off lettuce. Well, yeah, you can't live off that garbage lettuce that you've had at the store. You can live off of this stuff in an emergency, and you might be able to augment it from time to time with some venison or some wild hog or some rabbit meat if you raise some rabbits, or some chicken meat or chicken eggs, or even a squirrel or something from time to time. You can augment this, but this can be your primary source of medicinal molecules, plant-based medicine, and it can give you, the fiber and fill your belly with some real protein. There's calcium, there's magnesium, there's protein, there's chlorophyll. This is real food, not the garbage that they sell in the lettuce section at the grocery store. So thank you for pointing that out, David. What additional thoughts do you have on solutions for people right now, things that people might want to look into?
Well, the superfoods are really kind of where I'm focusing right now, because if you look at mulberry, those are quite easy to grow, and then you can eat the mulberry leaf or turn it into a powder and save it, dry it, keep it for a longer period of time. Moringa as well, the leaves off the moringa tree, superfood, and you can powderize those leaves, but you can eat them fresh, and the mulberry as well. So I'm kind of looking at all these dual purpose trees that give you the fruit, that give you the drumsticks that you could produce into oil off moringa. But, trying to use every part of the tree during the seasons. And if you have a tree growing, it's quite a bit easier to maintain it than it is replanting annual flowers or vegetables that you're going to turn into your medicines. And that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Let nature help you along as long as you start that process and maintain the process. If you're in that mind frame of turning it into a forest, and, what can you forage through the different months of the years? You spend the $12 or $15 to go to a bookstore and get a book on what grows in your area. Like if you bought one of the books in the Southeast U.S. where I'm at, it's not going to do you much good in Oregon or something. But get regional books where you can forage and find things that grow in your area to supplement also. Because every month of the year, there's something to eat, even coming into the nut season at the end of the year.
Absolutely.
Speaking of proteins, walnuts, hickory nuts, that sort of thing, chestnuts, there's a lot of nuts around that people don't think to eat any longer.
We get about a dozen eggs a day from our current hen laying flock. And remember, folks, you can also plant trees such as mulberry trees that will provide food for chickens. So you need to also think about how to grow your own grain or food supply for chickens or rabbits. And rabbits and chickens will eat also the leftovers from your garden. And then in addition, you need to be able to think about how to create your own fertilizer. And as I was interviewing Marjorie Wildcraft recently, just talking about urine. It's talking about the fertilizer value of urine, which people normally flush away. You're going to have to start thinking about that as another resource, an actual fertilizer resource that your body makes. And you can use that on a garden, and it can replace the synthetic fertilizers that are going to be in short supply. And I know it might be an odd thought. People are like, what, I got to save my pee? Well, I mean, only if you want to not starve to death, start thinking about these things. It's very real. So, David, we're down to about a couple minutes left here. I want to give you an opportunity to tell people a little bit about you and your work and how people can follow you as well. I know some of your videos are on many platforms, including Brighteon and others. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now, your focus.
Well, I've been following the cycles in history based on solar activity and how that would then affect what you consider civilization or society or emperors or these types of things that we've seen, kingdoms, fiefdoms, they're on a regular collapse pattern, but they're also on a regular growth pattern to the apex of what would be considered art and mathematics and engineering of the times. Of everything that you look back in history, it's always at the apex and then they collapse. Well, why is that? And that's what I started to look at. And then I was doing this cycle study, and it brings us to this point right now. And my whole message is we can get through this together if we're all informed enough to start to go off and be more self-autonomous and do your own decentralized gardening and grow our own foods and create communities that can then work through this. That's the message that I'm giving, trying to analyze the problem and then come up with solutions at the same time, because we are here now because everybody in the past did live through these events. And what we're facing now with so many more people on the planet, it's going to take a coordinated effort for us to move through. But in smaller communities, if you understand what's happening and the collapse cycle and what's being triggered with the losses of foods being grown on an industrial scale due to solar activity and jet streams and cloud cells moving, you can put some sense to it. And once you do that, communities have survived through time immemorial. So it's time for us to get back to take our own sovereignty back for so many aspects of our lives that have been given away to centralized control. But it's time to take it back, organize. And that is truly my message is, when I find new information, let's share it. And then maybe that'll help you and get you and your families and your communities a little bit more prepared so we can get through this. Because if your community is more prepared than mine is, we're all going to get through this better.
Yeah, we've all got to have this shared preparedness or mutual grassroots decentralized preparedness, and that's what's going to get us through this. And I just want to mention some names too. Not only you, David Dubine, but Ice Age Farmer is doing some excellent work in this area. Right, Christian. Marjorie Wildcraft, of course, is teaching people how to grow food. I'm one of the experts in the area of food as well, and I'm sharing information every day. I've got a podcast on Brighteon. Of course, I'm the editor of naturalnews.com. I think everybody knows that here. But folks, get the resources that you need, get some stored food where you can, but also learn how to grow food if you want to make it through this. And support Infowars.com. The silver coin is at patriotcollectibles.com to help this broadcast stay on air so we can continue to bring you these critical messages for human survival as we move into this time of controlled demolition. Thank you for watching today. I'm Mike Adams. Take care.